and I am here to review the book Growing Young, 6 Essential Strategies to Help Young People Discover and Love Your Church. Another cool graphic, huh? So this book was written about the research that was done and the findings from that through the Fuller Youth Institute of Fuller Theological Seminary. It was conducted over 4 years, and on the website it kind of goes into that there was about 10,000 hours of time spent in this research, about 1,300 interviews, 40 states and 80,000 miles, 21 denominations, 100 to 10,000 member-sized churches, and about 24% of those being 250 to 500 member churches that were part of this 4-year-long study looking at how churches are growing young. And in the opening chapter, it kind of deals with the issues or the problems of, the gap that exists for young people in the church. One of the statistics from the opening chapter talks about 40 to 50% of high school young people, once they graduate, end up leaving the faith. So about half of all of our young people in our churches after they graduate high school don't find faith viable or don't look to the church for that anymore. And so that's obviously a big issue, and it just continues to kind of grow. And so one of the things it points out is churches have all types of these ideas of what it means to grow young, and it talks about 10 qualities that your church does not need in order to grow young based on their research. Your church does not need to be a particular size. It doesn't have to be in a trendy location or region. It doesn't have to be an exact age. It doesn't have to be a certain denomination. It doesn't have to have a cool quotient, a big or modern building, a big budget, a contemporary worship service, a watered-down teaching style, or a hyper-entertaining ministry program. But it doesn't need these qualities, but they found in their research 6 distinct characteristics from these congregations that they came in contact with and interviewed. And what I wanted to do is talk about these characteristics, because that's what a majority of the book spends its time on. And they do a great job of not only unlocking or unpacking a little bit of what these things are, but it also talks about the ways that you can implement this. Also talks about assessing your own church. In fact, if you go to churchesgrowingyoung.org, and I'll include that link in the notes here, they have discussion guides for your church, sample sermon outlines based around the book. It has assessment tools. It's also going to have more tools, so if you want to sign up and receive more that you can do with this book, including, I think they're going to have one-on-one consultations and also other kinds of things that you can build into your church and try to do more to help your church grow young. You can go to that website and sign up for that. But so the 6 chapters in the book, or there's more chapters than 6, but the 6 characteristics, I should say, that I want to focus in on. The first one being, for a church to grow young, it must unlock Keychain leadership. And so I was just going to read a couple of passages from every chapter where it talks about that. So Keychain leadership, it says, when we refer to keys, we mean the capabilities, power, and access of leaders that carry the potential to empower young people. So by Keychain leaders, we mean pastoral or congregational leaders who are acutely aware of the keys on their keychain and intentional about entrusting and empowering generations, including teenagers and emerging adults, with their own set of keys. And it goes on to say, if you are willing to entrust your keys to young people, they will trust you with their hearts, their energy, their creativity, and even their friends. If you give them access, you have the opportunity to touch a whole generation. And really that's what the whole chapter starts off with, is one of the key characteristics they found with churches growing young is this keychain leadership style. One of the things I found fascinating about the chapter was on page 72 here, and really it's talking about it's like kind of an antidote, a part of the chapter, and it says, overall, preaching was not mentioned nearly as often as they anticipated as descriptions of why young people went to the church. And in fact, they even ask a question if we wonder if sermon preparation and preaching is an area in which some leaders could invest less time. And really their argument is that preaching, it's not that it's not important, but they interviewed a variety of churches where they considered there was strong preaching and then there was not strong preaching, but each of those churches and everything in between was still able to grow young because of these characteristics that they found within their congregation. One of those being keychain leadership. That relationship and relational ministry was actually more important than what was said on Saturday night or Sunday morning or Thursday evening or whatever their worship service time was and the sermon was delivered. The second part of that characteristic, so the first one being keychain leadership, is to empathize with young people. And I was going to read a little bit about what that might mean in page 93 of the book. It kind of says, we couldn't help but notice that young people who are surrounded by empathetic adults often become more empathetic themselves. When teenagers and emerging adults are appreciated, understood, and valued, they become conduits through which empathy flows. To them, through their research, they kind of found that churches that were empathizing with young people, that was one of the characteristics of growing young. And what they mean is, how are they answering the questions of young people? And so they bring up three distinct questions that they feel like young people have for the church. Who am I? Where do I fit? And what difference does it make? And so churches that were able to answer this in a gracious and loving manner towards young people, not forcing their own views or beliefs, not telling them what to think, but allowing a young person to grow into their views, to grow into their beliefs by nurturing those things in an empathetic way, were strategies for growing young. The third characteristic was taking Jesus's message seriously. And there's been other books written about this, studies, but it goes back into this idea of young people today have a theology that's been coined as moralistic therapeutic deism. And on page 130 it says, moralistic, meaning that religious young people equate faith with being a good moral person. Therapeutic, that faith becomes a means of feeling better about themselves. And deistic, meaning God exists, but this God is not involved in human affairs. So they say not only that, but also this idea of a golden rule Christianity. The moralistic therapeutic deism and the golden rule kind of theology, that both of those are rampant among young people. But the churches that were growing young were able to take what is a norm as far as theology goes for young people and to transition that into a more Jesus-centered, based, robust theology. And one of the things it points out on page 151 is that churches that were growing young, one of the things that they could do in order to kind of move towards this more was removing formulas from the conversation and starting to teach creeds instead of formulas. So getting back to the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed and talking about the Lord's Prayer and things like that, really getting into how the church answered questions long ago. How could those things be help to form, help to shape the theology of young people over just what feels good or Jesus wants to make me happy, things like that. There's also tons of other suggestions in here. One of my favorite quotes from the book, it says, "Locating obedience as a response to grace, not a prerequisite or alternative to grace, helps young people stand on more solid theological ground for their actions and decisions." And we all know in youth ministry for a long time, really it was all about obedience and discipline and things like that. Like, don't do these things and you will be a good Christ follower. And this is talking about, what if our obedience to God was a response to the grace of God? And how would that connect young people into the faith in a deeper way and take Jesus' message more seriously, as opposed to just Jesus wants to make me feel good. The fourth characteristic they found was a church was a warm community. And a little bit more that it feels a warm community. They said that they found it wasn't the preaching or teaching, it certainly wasn't the building or the worship style, it was the life shared among the congregation that drew young people in. So it's not necessarily all the bells and whistles or the typical thought that young people want this type of worship style. It was more of a, because of the warmness, the hospitality, the welcoming in of young people that drew young people into these congregations. And one of the characteristics that it talks about is intergenerational ministry, and how that is so key to a warm community, because it takes not just one person or one individual to help the church foster this warm community, but it takes the whole culture. It takes every person in the church to foster that warm community, and how intergenerational things can help build that. One of the reasons they push so much for intergenerational stuff is that they get into ratios and talk about how these congregations that were growing young, one of their characteristics for providing this warm community is a certain ratio that they created. So, we hear about universities and colleges that have this great teacher to student ratio, like one teacher for every 6 students, 7 students. Like, that's a desired thing. But what they're talking about as far as developing a warm community that helps churches grow young is developing a 5-to-1. So 5 adults who are engaged, who are connected to the young people, to one young person in your church. That's kind of a different of an opinion or a different thing, but that was one of the kind of ways to help that characteristic rise to the top. Another one is allowing, or being a church that grows young, is to prioritize young people and their families, so parents or guardians or something like that. That one of the, I think, most important things that came from this book is its mention of how young people were to be considered or must play in that church a load-bearing role. And what they mean by that, or what they say about that, is when young people in your church and community know they are needed and invited into participation just like everyone else, they sense that they play a load-bearing role in the congregation. They become purposeful co-participants in the life of the body rather than junior participants or future members. So it's not about them getting older and wiser and participating then. It's about doing the work right now together, as is, that they are provided leadership opportunities. They are provided roles with real meaning, not just set aside and being this separatist group in your congregation. But the churches that were growing young provided young people the opportunities to be a load-bearing, be one of the pillars that holds up the church. And that's so important, not just for congregations, but that's so important for denominations, I think. Being someone who works in a denominational structure, how can we structure ourselves to give young people a load-bearing role, not just one-off service roles or little things, but actually major contributions. Those are the types of churches that were growing young, as ones that were providing those sort of opportunities for young people. And the last one was another very important characteristic, and that was to be the best neighbors that they could be. And the way that it was kind of broken down in the book and talked about is thinking of our culture and the differences in our culture and how we should demonstrate the same empathy we do to young people in our congregations. We should be warm and welcoming, be inclusive and hospitable to all of our neighbors, all the people that surround us in our culture. That young people desire that. They desire acceptance. They desire their friends and their ideas to be a part of the conversation. And the book goes on to talk more about how it doesn't apply that you have to accept or that you shouldn't pretend that there are differences, that those don't exist. But it's about dialogue. It's about openness. And it says, when churches seem closed to dialogue, young people often look elsewhere for more palatable conversations about issues that matter most to them. And so churches that were growing young were not afraid of the difficult questions. They weren't afraid of doubt. They weren't afraid of the journey. That they were willing to foster relationships, a warm community that was Jesus-centered, but allowed this diversity to take place within it. So those were the 6 characteristics, and the book kind of goes on to talk more about how you can implement this and also strategies. At the end of each chapter, it has little pointers or little topics or things that they noticed about how these characteristics became fostered in these churches. It also has discussion questions, so if you wanted to go through this as something to discuss with your congregation. So once again, the book is Growing Young, 6 Essential Strategies to Help Young People Discover and Love Your Church. And I think it's a super important book. It's brand new, so a lot of this research is things that you might have found, but this is comprehensive, I think, as far as what churches are doing to grow young, to welcome young people, and to bridge that divide, to bridge that gap. And so if you are a pastor or leader of young people, I can't highly recommend you enough to get this book and to dive into it and check out the website, Churches Growing Young. I know that it's something that I'm going to be focusing on, praying on, spending more time in, thinking about more about how to strategize and build mechanisms and programs and ways to facilitate and foster these kinds of characteristics in the things I'm doing. I think it would really benefit your church as well to kind of dive into these ideas and think more about the ways that you can welcome and to build bridges and help young people become much more than just a demographic, but a load-bearing, important member of your congregation. So anyway, I'm looking forward to reading the next book and sharing a little bit about it. I hope you found this review in some way insightful, and hopefully you'll go pick up the book and check it out for yourself. Thanks.